In the long and turbulent history of medieval India, there are rulers remembered for their conquests, and there are rulers remembered for their compassion. Some kings built empires through war and bloodshed, while others tried to build them through care, reform, and renewal. Among those rare monarchs who sought to heal rather than destroy, one name stands out with quiet dignity: Firoz Shah Tughlaq, the benevolent reformer of the Delhi Sultanate. Firoz Shah's reign was not born out of peace, it emerged from the ashes of chaos. Before him ruled Muhammad bin Tughlaq, a man of immense intelligence and ambition, but whose reign had been marked by turmoil. The empire had expanded too far, rebellions had broken out in every direction, and the people were weary of endless experiments and harsh taxation. When Muhammad bin Tughlaq died in 1351, India was in disarray. The once mighty Delhi Sultanate was cracking under its own weight. It was in this fragile moment that Firoz Shah ascended the throne. He was not a conqueror in the traditional sense. He did not march into power with the sound of war drums or rivers of blood. He came as a reformer, as a man determined to mend what had been broken. From the beginning, his purpose was clear: to restore order, justice, and prosperity to a people who had lost faith in their rulers. Firoz Shah Tughlaq was born in 1309 into the noble Tughlaq family. He was the nephew of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and cousin of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Unlike his predecessors, who were often stern and unpredictable, Firoz was known for his calm temperament and his deep concern for the welfare of others. He had seen firsthand the suffering caused by his cousin's harsh policies, the forced relocations, the heavy taxes, and the relentless wars. And so, when destiny placed the crown upon his head, Firoz resolved to rule differently, to rule. From the very first day, he sought reconciliation. He pardoned rebels, restored confiscated lands, and announced that the days of cruelty were over. He said that justice, not fear, would be the foundation of his reign. The people, long oppressed by the burdens of past years, welcomed him with open arms. One of Firoz Shah's greatest qualities was his understanding of administration. He was not content with words alone. He wanted action, visible change, and lasting reform. His empire stretched from Delhi to Bengal, from Sindh to the Deccan, but his focus was not on expansion. It was on consolidation. He wanted to strengthen the heart of the Sultanate so that it would never again collapse under mismanagement. He began with the land, the backbone of the empire. Agriculture had suffered greatly under previous regimes. Famine, war, and misrule had left fields barren and farmers desperate. Firoz understood that without food, no state could survive. So he introduced a fair and efficient revenue system. Taxes were reduced, and those who had been unable to pay were forgiven their debts. He ordered the construction of new irrigation canals, wells, and reservoirs across northern India. These canals transformed the land, bringing water to regions that had been dry for centuries. Some of these canals remarkably still exist today, a testament to the vision of a ruler who thought not just of his own time, but of generations to come. Firoz Shah's love for construction was not driven by vanity. He built not only for glory, but for purpose. During his long reign, he founded new towns and cities, Firozabad near Delhi being the most famous of them. He built mosques, schools, hospitals, and rest houses for travelers. He believed that a ruler's duty was to serve his people, to make their lives easier, and to ensure that justice reached even the most remote corners of the land. Perhaps what made him most beloved was his compassion for the poor. He abolished many harsh taxes that had weighed heavily on farmers and merchants. He created pensions for the elderly and for scholars. He established orphanages for children, hospitals for the sick, and shelters for widows and travelers. He ordered that food and water should be freely available at public rest houses. His government gave special attention to the maintenance of roads and bridges, making travel safer and trade more prosperous. For Firoz Shah, ruling was not about domination, it was about responsibility. He saw himself as the caretaker of God's people, and he ruled with humility. Chronicles of the time tell us that he often walked among his subjects, listening to their problems and addressing their needs. His justice was firm but humane. Even criminals, once punished, were given chances to rebuild their lives. But while he was gentle in governance, he was also deeply religious. Firoz Shah was a devout Muslim, and his reign reflected his desire to align law and faith. He revived the practice of Islamic law, or Sharia, in administration. Judges were appointed to ensure fair trials, and punishments were codified according to religious principles. However, this religious devotion sometimes made him less tolerant toward non-Muslims than some of his predecessors had been. He reintroduced the jizya tax, a tax paid by non-Muslims, which had been relaxed earlier. Yet, despite this, many historical accounts describe his rule as generally peaceful and just, even toward those of other faiths. One of the most remarkable aspects of Firoz Shah's reign was his love for learning and history. He believed that knowledge was the light that guided civilizations. He collected old books, repaired ancient monuments, and even took care to restore the legacy of past kings. The Qutub Minar in Delhi, damaged by lightning during his time, was repaired under his supervision. He built pillars of Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor, into his own architectural projects, a sign of respect for India's earlier heritage. Few rulers before him had shown such an interest in preserving the memory of the past. He also founded schools and centers of learning where scholars from across the Islamic world were invited to teach. His court became a place of culture, literature, and scholarship. The Arabic and Persian languages flourished, and poets and writers found patronage under his protection. He believed that education was the foundation of good governance and that rulers must always learn from history to avoid repeating its mistakes. But not all of Firoz Shah's challenges came from outside the palace. Within his court, he faced the delicate balance of power between the nobility, the military, and the clergy. To maintain peace, he distributed lands and honors among the nobles, but also made sure that no single man became too powerful. He understood that stability came from balance, from keeping ambition under check without causing rebellion. Even so, Firoz Shah's reign was not free of hardship. In some regions, local governors tried to assert independence. In Bengal, Gujarat, and the Deccan, rebellions flickered like small fires that threatened to spread, but Firoz rarely resorted to excessive violence. When possible, he preferred negotiation over bloodshed. He would send envoys, offer pardons, and restore lost honors to those who returned to loyalty. His goal was unity, not conquest. He also faced natural calamities, floods, droughts, and famines that tested the resilience of his reforms. Yet through it all, his commitment to his people never wavered. When crops failed, he ordered grain from state reserves to be distributed. When rivers flooded, he sent engineers to rebuild canals and dams. His government functioned like a living organism, responsive, compassionate, and efficient. Firoz Shah was also a man who cared about posterity. He wrote his own memoir, known as Futuhat-i-Firoz Shahi, in which he detailed his policies, his works, and his philosophy of rule. It was not a boastful account, but a thoughtful reflection of a man who wanted future generations to understand his intentions. In that text, he wrote that he ruled not for personal glory, but for the pleasure of God and the welfare of his people. Yet, even the reign of a benevolent ruler is not free from flaws. Firoz Shah's excessive reliance on religious scholars sometimes made his government rigid. His attempts to strictly enforce religious law alienated certain sections of society. His deep concern for justice sometimes led to harsh punishments, especially when he believed moral order was being violated. And though his rule brought peace and prosperity, it also weakened the empire's military spirit. The focus on welfare over warfare made the Sultanate less prepared for future invasions. When Firoz Shah grew old, he began to see signs of decay that no reform could stop. The nobles grew restless, rival factions emerged, and unity began to crumble. He tried to ensure a smooth succession by appointing his son as heir, but after his death in 1388, the old rivalries returned with full force. The empire he had stabilized for nearly 4 decades began to fragment once again. But even as the political structure weakened, his legacy lived on in the hearts of the people. To them, he was not just a king, he was a caretaker, a builder, and a reformer. His name became synonymous with compassion and order. The canals he built continued to nourish the land, the roads he laid continued to connect towns, and the monuments he raised continued to remind people of a time when rulers thought not just of their own glory, but of their subjects' welfare. Even centuries later, historians wrote of Firoz Shah as a man of vision. He represented an ideal often forgotten in the march of empires, that governance is not just about power, but about purpose. His reign showed that kindness could achieve what cruelty could not. That a ruler could be strong without being feared, respected without being ruthless. If we walk through the ruins of Firoz Shah Tughlaq in Delhi today, the ancient citadel he built, we can still feel the echoes of that vision. The stone walls stand silent, but they tell a story of compassion woven into the very fabric of governance. The inscriptions speak of a time when the ruler of Delhi sought to balance justice with mercy, faith with reason, and ambition with humility. It is said that Firoz Shah once remarked, "I found Delhi full of ruins and built it anew." Those words capture the essence of his rule. He rebuilt not only the city, but the spirit of a broken nation. He reminded people that leadership is not about dominion, but about service. That the true strength of a kingdom lies not in its armies or its palaces, but in the happiness of its people. His death in 1388 marked the end of an era, the last great age of peace before the Delhi Sultanate descended into decline. After him came chaos, civil war, and invasion. The Tughlaq dynasty slowly disintegrated, paving the way for new powers, the Sayyids, the Lodis, and eventually the Mughals. But in the long memory of history, Firoz Shah's name remained a symbol of what a ruler could be when he ruled with conscience. His reforms in administration, public works, and justice influenced generations to come. Even later emperors looked back at his policies for inspiration. His canals continued to support agriculture for centuries. His monuments became part of Delhi's living heritage. And his vision of a just and compassionate ruler became a standard that few would match. In the end, Firoz Shah Tughlaq's life was not a story of conquest or glory. It was a story of healing, of a man who tried to repair the wounds of a troubled empire. In a world ruled by swords, he chose to rule by the plow, the canal, and the pen. In an age of destruction, he chose construction. In a time of cruelty, he chose mercy. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy far greater than any battlefield victory. As centuries passed, empires rose and fell, But the story of Firoz Shah remained, the story of a ruler who cared for his people as a father cares for his children. His memory lingers not in the sound of war drums, but in the quiet flow of canals, the shade of trees he planted, and the ruins that still whisper his name. So perhaps the real question is this: what makes a ruler truly great? Is it the size of his empire or the kindness of his heart? Is it the number of battles he wins or the number of lives he improves? In the grand march of history, where names of conquerors fade with time, does not the name of a builder, a healer, shine brighter? And as we look at our world today, filled again with ambition and conflict, we might ask ourselves, do we remember the lessons of men like Firoz Shah Tughlaq? Do we still believe that compassion can be a form of strength, that reform can be as powerful as conquest, and that the truest legacy of leadership is not fear, but love? Because that is what Firoz Shah Tughlaq taught us, that the greatest rulers are not those who change maps, but those who change hearts.